Hello and welcome to the Green Voice podcast, giving you all the dirt on sustainability here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm your host, Grant Ervin, Director of Environmental, Social Governance, and Innovation at S&B USA. Super excited to be here with everyone. And we have a terrific guest, my colleague Lora Phillips from PNC Bank. Lora serves as the Senior Vice President and Director of Environmental, Social, and Governance at PNC, where she oversees efforts to integrate ESG into all considerations of business decisions. Lora, welcome to the Green Voice podcast.
Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. It's great to have you here. We always dive in and kind of talk with our guests first about their journey. I want to obviously get into kind of your role and position and the work that PNC does, but tell us a little bit about Lora first and how you got to where you are currently.
Sure, yeah. So I've been at PNC for about 6 years now, and I always kind of joke that I'm a banker by choice, not by trade. I spent the vast majority of my career in the tech space, so I still consider myself kind of newish to finance, but not new to the world of corporate responsibility and environmental and social considerations in business. So I started out, one of the things I love about this space is that people do come to it from any number of different paths.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. So I've worked with people who have education backgrounds and finance backgrounds and more recently kind of core sustainability backgrounds, but that didn't really exist back in the Stone Ages when when I started out.
Back when the wheel was invented,
Right.
they weren't really thinking about that, right?
So I actually came to this work out of kind of a corporate communications path. And I happened to be sort of at the right place, at the right time, at the right company. And that gave me an opportunity to get my fingers in a lot of different pots. And I really got to build a corporate responsibility platform from the ground up. I've done a little bit of sustainable supply chain work, a little bit of corporate philanthropy, a little bit of community relations. So it's been a very fun and never boring path.
That's awesome. Technology, hardware, software? Software. Was there a big transition for you in terms of corporate responsibility in the technology and software space to a financial institution like PNC?
Yeah, in a couple of ways. I think one is just industry, right? The tech industry, just in terms of culture and the way that they approach kind of problem solving is very different from kind of a highly regulated financial industry, right? So that was an education for me. The other thing that I very deliberately did when I came to PNC was I wanted to explore kind of that world of sustainable finance a little bit more in an in-depth way than I had previously had the opportunity to do. So, I mentioned I had done a lot of corporate philanthropy, community relations, employee engagement, pro bono, sabbatical types of things. And I was looking for kind of, how do I learn about green and social bonds? How do I learn about, what it's like to lean into helping clients sort of finance their own ambitions from an environmental or social perspective? And switching the industries really gave me that opportunity.
That's awesome. Now, at PNC, obviously a venerable Pittsburgh institution. I don't even want to guess at how many years, 100 plus. I know that. And so there's always these evolutions in kind of the business cycle in terms of new technologies, new business processes. PNC has really been at the forefront of corporate social responsibility, since its advent. I think part of it is the mission of a bank. But what are some of the things, just in your tenure there, that you've seen that transition start to take shape?
Yeah, so one of the things I love about PNC is it really is about who we are as a bank. So we position ourselves, we are a Main Street bank, right? And we're a Main Street bank in every community that we have a presence in. Our model leans heavily on what we call regional presidents. So these are, the leaders of the bank in the communities where they operate.
So no matter which market they're in in the community.
They're the leader on the ground, right? And so they're really leaning into the business, but they're also building those strong connections in the community, talking to our clients, talking to the nonprofits, talking to the advocates and activists in the different communities where we have a business presence. And they're really the experts, right, on what it is to be PNC in Birmingham, in, Louisville, wherever they happen to be. And so PNC's corporate responsibility journey has just really followed along organically along that path, right? So we're already deeply embedded in communities through our Grow Up Great philanthropic efforts, which focus on amazing program, has been around for a really long time, focuses on early childhood education, and just has really built from there. And it's been I think a really natural progression for PNC.
I really came to learn and work with PNC when I was doing community development work. Okay. And so understanding, community development block grants and community development financial institutions, the Community Reinvestment Act, all those sorts of things. And PNC always was at the forefront, just terrific partners. And I don't know if they're listening, but quick, shout outs to folks like Stephanie Cipriani and George Fosselt and Kathy Niederberger. I mean, these were folks that introduced me to PNC. And the thing that I always loved about not just them, but the company was just the collegialness and the problem solving ability. And a lot of that was, because people were Pittsburgh based and they knew the company, but they also knew the communities. Yeah. As the company has grown, and you mentioned, Birmingham and like different markets that you have expanded to, what's that look like in terms of integrating and acquiring other businesses, and how does that culture fuse together? Because I presume that not every bank is the Main Street bank that PNC always has been and is. What's that cultural integration been like?
Yeah, I think PNC does this in such a deliberate and thoughtful way that it just really does work. I think, with the regional president's model supported at the corporate level by groups like Community Development Banking, which is now incidentally part of what we call our corporate responsibility group at PNC.
Okay.
So that group includes Community Development Banking, includes my group, Environmental, Social, and Governance, Diversity and Inclusion, and our Corporate Foundation and Community Affairs group, which is where Grow Up Great was born and continues to grow today. So it's a very deliberate application of that Main Street Bank model where those corporate teams help the regional teams to sort of localize corporate programs in ways that work for the communities where we find ourselves.
So it's not just top-down integration, it's really kind of bottom-up. So a lot of listening on the ground and understanding what's happening in those markets and how does PNC apply kind of those ethoses to those activities.
Exactly right.
Interesting. So we've heard a little bit about your journey. We've talked a little bit about PNC. The term environmental social governance, I have it in my title, you have it in your title. I'm interested personally. I mean, what's a little bit about your day-to-day activities? Because I imagine both coming from software and into financial institutions, I work for an infrastructure and construction company. Our jobs are probably similar, but I'm going to imagine day-to-day applications might be a little different.
Sure.
I don't know. What's your day-to-day look like?
Yeah. So I run a small team that's focused on probably 5 big categories of activity. The first big bucket that we look after is all of our corporate responsibility reporting and disclosures and kind of that transparency piece. So what are the commitments we've made to our stakeholders? Yep. How are we living up to those commitments? And how does our disclosure about that progress show up in the public view? So that's one category. The second category is environmental and social risk management. So this is probably somewhat unique to a bank, right?
Yeah.
And this is really all about making sure that we have processes and frameworks built to make sure that our frontline bankers have somewhere to go if they have questions, right, about, a specific industry. What are the environmental risks that we might need to consider? What are the human rights risks we might need to consider? Yep. What questions do we have to have answered in order to help this client through our financing process? So that's a function we perform for the bank. The third category is kind of broadly stakeholder engagement, right? So we spend a lot of time with investors talking about our community benefits plan, our sustainability journey, anything that they might have questions about and want to hear from us about how we're approaching it.
Right.
We also, do employee engagement, bubbling up concerns and questions from employees, as well as some client engagement hand in hand with our frontline folks. The fourth category is our climate action strategy. So, as you're well aware, climate, highly intersectional issue.
Yes.
Right? So we
touches everything.
It touches literally everything. So we kind of think of ourselves as sort of a hub and spoke model. And we've got folks at the bank on our risk teams who are thinking about this from, how do we incorporate a climate risk lens into our enterprise risk management frameworks that already exist.
For facilities or for lending or both?
So we work with our facilities team. We call them our realty services team,
Okay.
and kind of how we manage our own resources well to save money and, make a safe, comfortable, pleasant environment for employees. So that's certainly a piece of it.
PNC was a leader in early branch development around LEED certification and huge quality improvement in terms of the physical presence of the bank too, I think.
Yes, yeah. It's a huge selling point, I think, for employees who are coming in. We have
great workspaces.
Not only beautiful spaces, but, clean air, great water, and other resource usage.
Kind of important.
Very important. Yeah. So climate action strategy. And then that final piece is really, it's kind of a catch-all, right? I'd like to think about us as sort of a little incubator inside of PNC for maybe things that don't yet have a home, right? So when we first started talking about green bonds, we partnered with our treasury management folks and our what eventually became our sustainable finance folks to kind of scope that out and figure out what resources we needed to make that happen. So those kinds of fun projects kind of fall in that category.
So it really takes on kind of like the innovation lens, right?
Yes.
Whether that's a new product or service or maybe a new employee program or a new way to interface with the community. A lot of times that could start with your shop.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. I think it's one of those fascinating, it's a fun role. Just quick editorializing for us or folks that are interested in kind of the environmental, social, and governance space. It's awesome. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I love it because it's such a learning environment.
Absolutely.
For us, in the one of the great things from my transition into an environmental social governance role was I didn't have to learn a new vocabulary per se, because when I was in the public sector, I was doing a lot with infrastructure and development and construction, but I'm seeing it from a totally different lens. And so it's a lot of fun in that regard, in that you're learning about the operations of the business, but how these different lenses that you just talked about apply. Do you get that same type of spark?
For sure. And I think everybody on the team, one of the things we find ourselves constantly saying is it's never boring, right? There's always
never
something new.
Moment.
There's never a dull moment. There's always something new to learn. There's always some new issue, right? That, today it's climate, maybe tomorrow it's biodiversity, whatever it might be. There's a constant upskilling and self-education that has to happen to kind of help steer the ship, right? And that's so much fun.
You mentioned this, kind of you're at the epicenter of things. It's kind of like you're the circular tinker toy.
I like that.
Do you find that as people come to learn more about environmental social governance within the company, they start to seek you out and like, hey, Lora, I got this question, or what do you think about, does that start to happen over time?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think that happens for the whole team as well, right? And even sort of our extended network of affiliated folks, right?
Yeah.
So we now have a sustainable finance team that gets brought into all kinds of client conversations just to sort of help brainstorm what might be possible to help clients reach their goals. And we certainly get pulled in to kind of either offer, some insight or an opinion on a different issue or industry. And that makes it always challenging and always interesting.
You mentioned sustainable finance, and maybe a quick plug. The Earth Day Pittsburgh group is putting together a lunch and learn session, and we're participating with that at S&B USA around this topic of sustainable finance and financing the energy transition. You talked a little bit about green bonds, and what does that look like both from the ESG standpoint, but also from the company standpoint in terms of new offerings? Like how's PNC diving into that conversation?
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, maybe just last year, actually, we committed to mobilize $20 billion.
That's it.
In environmental finance. Yeah.
Just 20 billion.
20
That's
billion.
amazing.
Billion with a B.
Yeah.
And that was really, in direct response to what we were hearing from our clients. They're setting targets. They're transitioning, maybe their fleet to electric vehicles. They're doing all kinds of things that make sense for their businesses.
Yeah.
And so they're looking to their banks to kind of help figure out, how to finance that, how to think about it, how to structure it. And so, we made the initial commitment, and then just late last year, maybe actually early this year, again, in response to sort of that client demand, we increased that commitment to $30 billion.
Wow.
So that's a 5-year commitment with 2021, I believe, being the first year.
Now, that commitment, when you're talking about that, is that lending, like tranches of capital, bond financing?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
So we're talking about a couple of specific categories, right? So first is renewable energy project financing. So solar, wind, these types of things. It's green building. You talked a little bit about PNC's leaning into kind of LEED certification. Many of our corporate real estate clients are building to LEED standards or additional sort of, equivalent standards. And so we're focusing there. We're focusing on clean transportation, so electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles.
Big fan of that at S&B. Yeah, we have an e-mobility unit where we're focused in on the design, the construction, and the delivery of those installations.
Yeah.
So we should talk.
Yeah, for sure. We should talk after this. And then the final bucket for that commitment is what we call sustainability-linked bonds and loans. So this is working with our clients who, again, are setting their own commitments for the trajectory that they want to set for their business and figuring out, is there a way to, tie some interest rate reductions to kind of achieving those goals over the long term.
It's a space, too, that we're well versed in also at S&B. We have a project right now. We have a group called a concessions team and then a construction team. Concessions is about infrastructure project finance, and then, the construction is actual delivery and building the asset. And we have a program in Fargo, North Dakota right now, which is the largest green bond financed project in the country. And just to speak to that, I mean, the client came to us not just to build something, but they needed the capital. And so you're seeing that across PNC's footprint right now, where there's increased demand for infrastructure services, for renewable energy, for electric vehicles. So it's this bottom-up kind of thing that you guys are responding to.
Absolutely.
What does, some of those day-to-day conversations at your level, it's coming from those regional directors or?
Yeah, it comes out of our regional president's office, but it also comes out of just kind of frontline bankers, right? Wow. We're seeing it across industries. We're seeing it, across issue area. They're hungry for, guidance and some financing roadmaps, right?
Is that, I'm taking it from a commercial standpoint, but I'm presuming it's also residential and day-to-day customers as well, right?
That's right.
Interesting. Maybe that's how you're serving the market. What about internal to PNC? That we talked a little bit about facilities, and there's obviously the new PNC Tower, and your branches are Google and LEED, and all these great things. But what are some of those sustainability initiatives that you guys are developing, whether it's for employees or the branch network? What's that look like from your shop?
Yeah, I can tell you, for me personally, one that I'm most excited about is a program that we're calling Climate Transition Advocates. And this dovetails nicely off the last conversation we had about client demand. This is really all about educating and empowering our frontline employees, or really any employee, to have a conversation with our clients at scale about the climate transition and how we can help them achieve their goals. And so we are modeling this after two very successful similar programs at PNC that we've launched over the last couple of years. One is our Women's Business Advocates program, which looks after the unique needs of female financial decision makers. And one
As
is
a household or business leaders?
business level, but there's also content available for at the household level as well. And then our newest one is our Minority Small Business Advocates program. And this similarly looks at the unique needs of small businesses owned by members of the minority community. And so we're modeling this advocates program after both of those. And the idea is we'll launch a pilot sometime this summer and learn from that, sort of hand recruit a handful of employees to give us some very candid and honest feedback about what's working and what's not, and then make it available to more employees in the fall.
That's awesome. We talked a little bit about stakeholder engagement. What does that look like, in terms of both the clients but also internal? You mentioned, kind of the employee side of it. When we think about the S and ESG, that social aspect, I always say that's all about people.
Yeah.
And whether we're thinking about encouraging diversity or we're looking at helping to serve underserved populations, but it's also about, our employees, our team members. What's that engagement process? How have you guys worked on that?
Yeah, so we have a number of different mechanisms to really bring employees into the fold from either an environmental perspective, a social issue perspective, across the gamut of corporate responsibility issues. And so we have a number of different EBRGs, Employee Business Resource Groups, which are focused on, we have a women's business group, or we have an African American employees business group. I think there's, maybe up to 20 different EBRGs now, including an interfaith EBRG, which gives people an opportunity to have conversations across.
What's that acronym again?
Oh, sorry. EBRG.
And what's it stand for?
Employee Business Resource Group.
Resource Group. Okay.
It's just a mouthful to say.
We live in a world of acronyms.
We do, and I try very hard to avoid them.
And so when I pick up a new one, I'm like, ooh, that's a new
acronym.
Add that to the acronym dictionary list. Exactly. And so you use those employee groups as a way to engage, to listen, to learn.
That's right.
Is it a formal process or surveys or
It actually is a very
groups?
Formal process at PNC. So we have, again, EBRGs that are more focused on the individual employee level, but we also have regional D&I councils, which dovetail with our regional president's model. So those are market-based.
Okay.
Then we have line of business councils that are focused on, so I'm in the corporate responsibility group. So we have a corporate responsibility diversity and inclusion council, or there's a retail diversity and inclusion council. And those groups do put together strategic plans for the year based on guidance out of our corporate diversity and inclusion team. And they're given, each year some specific categories to focus on in terms of developing programming, developing communications, engaging employees either in their line of business, if they're a line of business council, in their region, if they're a regional council. And one of the things I'll say about our regional councils that I do think is a little unique still is that we do apply both an internal lens as well as an external lens on our diversity and inclusion initiatives, and particularly on our market-based councils. These are really councils that are focused on thinking, how do we serve the diverse needs of our clients in the diverse communities where we operate? Many of our diversity and inclusion speakers or History and Heritage Month events, we're allowed to bring in clients or other folks from outside the company as well.
Interesting. You mentioned a turn of phrase there that I use a lot, the internal and external. Is that a challenge in terms of managing and focusing your external engagement versus your internal activity? Because I say it, we have to look internally, we have to work externally. You have to do both, period, stop, right, end of sentence. But there's a challenge in terms of managing both time commitment But it's something that I struggle with, I think. And what's some of the give me some solutions, Laura.
I don't know that I'm going to have like A+ solutions for you. I think it's a challenge, but I also think it's about the mindset you bring to the problem, right? And I know on our team, we try very hard to make sure that the message we're delivering externally is the same as the message we're delivering internally, right? We're not trying to be cute with the language. We're not trying to kind of have, one set of messaging for internal employees than we have for outside folks, because that doesn't work anyways, right? Anything you're going to put out internally is going to end up externally in some form.
The ethos has to carry through.
Yes,
right?
That's exactly right.
That if you're doing the work internally to develop a program or initiative, that it has to externally face as well.
That's
and
right.
vice versa.
Yeah.
On that external facing side, you guys do a lot of work, in terms of community engagement. We talked about this a little early on in the conversation, but you recently launched a community benefits plan initiative. And I was real curious to learn more about that. And, one, how was it structured? And then what's it look like in application?
Yeah, so this started when we announced our intent to acquire BBVA USA, which was a bank headquartered in Alabama and
through the southern United States.
Had a huge, kind of Sunbelt footprint. And this is very common when large banks sort of acquire other banks to undergo a formal process whereby you're making sure that you are considering underserved communities as you merge together. And, this was an interesting process to watch unfold because this all happened during the throes of the pandemic. So
started right during or before?
It started during.
Okay.
So I think there were pros and cons to that. A pro being we really embarked on this pretty ambitious listening tour where our chief corporate responsibility officer, but also our chief executive officer talked to, dozens of nonprofits across our current PNC footprint at the time, as well as our expanding BBVA USA footprint. And doing those listening tours virtually, I think allowed us to very quickly and very easily hear from a wide diversity of voices across the country. And so that was a definite boon to this process. And what happened in that process was, we collected all kinds of information about community needs in communities across the country.
Across the footprint.
And we took that in-house and really did some analyzing of what we heard. And where we landed was kind of three focus areas for this, what got structured as an $88 billion community benefits plan. So we focused on affordable housing, both the creation and the preservation of affordable housing in communities across the country, supporting small businesses, including micro businesses across the country, which we define as being businesses with less than $1 million in revenue, so very, very small businesses. And then community development financing, which I know is something that's near and dear to your heart. So investments and loans and services in low to moderate income communities across the country.
And that helped you to basically start to integrate, going back to like the structure of your team and who's in your direct orbit. You can have those conversations. You can start to pull off the shelf, literally.
That's right.
The experts in those spaces.
That's exactly right.
That's so fascinating. Did you have that structure in place prior to?
So it was interesting. We did, but just barely.
Okay.
We came together as a team, I want to say, in the summer of 2020. And then shortly thereafter, before the end of that year, we were announcing and moving forward with the integration with BBVA.
That's awesome. Now, you mentioned early on, too, about one of the pillars of your program is climate strategy. Can you talk about that? And then how does that interface with this community benefits program, if at all? Is the climate strategy purely an internal focus, or is it, again, that internal-external blend?
It's really an internal and external blend. And there's a couple of different I guess, categories of thinking that we do when it comes to the climate action strategy. So first, we're very interested in building employee engagement, as we talked about with the Climate Transition Advocates Program. We're very interested in being a part of the right conversations, right? And so that's really about finding those long-term partnerships. We're members of something called the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, which will mean nothing to anybody outside of the financial industry.
You'll be surprised. There's some of our listeners that will probably
They'll
recognize
pick up
that.
on that.
Yep.
Otherwise known as PCAF if we're adding to the dictionary of acronyms. And this is important because, we're really a part of the governing body that's doing the work to figure out how we calculate and measure things like Scope 3 emissions, right? Particularly financed emissions for banks. So it's important to have a voice and an active participation rate in these types of partnerships for us. The other piece is externally facing, right? And that's the part about listening to our clients and understanding their challenges and what their trajectory looks like and how we can help contribute to sort of creative solutions and find the right financing path for them.
Does that, the bond climate, like the environmental finance commitment that you guys made, does that originate from that strategy, or is that part of the strategy?
So it's part of the strategy. I think, we were hearing from our clients, well before we sort of codified that into what we're now considering that climate action strategy package. But it's definitely a key piece of that and a driver for sure.
Interesting. Maybe to drill down there a little bit, the idea around sustainable bond financing. One of the things that, we went through this in our Fargo project, the Fargo Moorhead Flood Diversion Project, about getting certified. And so that the bond is a green bond, and, both for the scale, but also for the delivery, in terms of making sure that we're following certain criteria. We're doing, kind of the letter of the law in terms of what a sustainable green bond requires. Are you providing those types of services for clients? And also, I think about kind of municipalities, for example. There's a need in terms of sustainable finance for a lot of this infrastructure, water, energy, et cetera. How are you guys helping clients in that process? Both at the early stages, but also, through the delivery and construction of projects? Yeah.
So our sustainable finance team includes not only bankers, but also ESG professionals. So they're really able to have those conversations that are about the intersection of a client's financing needs with how a client should be thinking about structuring a green bond framework. Who do you talk to make sure that your green bond framework meets sort of an equivalency with the UN Sustainable Development Goals? How do you go about drafting that? What could that look like? So they're able to bring both of those pieces to those conversations.
So you can really help hold the hand through the process with a client, whether that's a municipality or a state agency or, other kind of private ventures, from soup to nuts, basically.
That's right.
That's super helpful. Coming close on time here, and one of the things I wanted to hit on is that fifth category that you mentioned, the opportunity for innovation and incubation. What are some things that you have? You can just share with us, right?
Yeah.
Some of the things that are in the laboratory, basically, that you guys are conjuring up.
So again, Climate Transition Advocates is really the one that I would point to right now that's most exciting to us. But we're also thinking about, our own sustainable debt issuances. And we do have a sustainable financing bond framework, but, do we have to make tweaks to that to make sure that we're keeping up with, outside standards? Are we, looking at our own disclosures in our corporate responsibility report? We're benchmarking against peers. We're benchmarking against what we're hearing from investors in terms of, where our gaps might be.
That's so important. That we talked about this, throughout. This is really about business transparency, right? In terms of having full disclosures, from whether it's financing and its role with the environment, financing and the role of human development and people, or just good business practices, that G side, making sure that you have the right legal frameworks and structures that you're just doing good business.
That's right.
I mean, that's so important to hear that from a bank. I'm glad to hear that too. But you guys are truly a leader in this space. And so, we want to thank you for the work that PNC is doing, the contribution obviously you make to the Pittsburgh community, but also to the new communities that you're serving around the country. Lora, what's up ahead for you? What's kind of the next big thing you think?
Well, we're very excited to be partnering with Pittsburgh Earth Day. Next month in June, we're hosting a lunch and learn here in Pittsburgh at the Tower in our auditorium there, focused on a panel about financing the transition to a low-carbon economy. So we'll have lots of great folks on that panel, including our own head of sustainable finance. So excited about that.
I love that you put that plug in and I didn't have to do that. That's amazing. We're going to be looking forward to that. I think it's going to be an exciting conversation, definitely timely. Lora Phillips, thanks so much for being a guest here.
Thank you.
We really appreciate your insights and hope you'll come back and join us again soon.
It was a ton of fun. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us here on the Green Voice podcast. Gave you some dirt here from the good folks at PNC Bank on their great work in sustainability. We'll talk to you soon and keep listening. Thanks much, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.